I am psyched to be here with Emily. Emily, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I'm really, really happy to be here with you.
Same here. You've got such a fascinating background, and maybe just to sort of square the work that you're currently doing and the problems that you're solving at Collegevine. Can you just walk us through your career trajectory and how you went from serving higher education with startups to then working for some enterprise solutions and then your current work at Collegevine, how that all come to pass?
Yeah, easy question, right? To be asked about yourself and how you got here. It's all 2020 in the rear view. But it started for me as a senior in college, and this will maybe like warm your career services heart, Mike. But like, I don't know why it didn't occur to me in the second semester of my senior year that like I would have to leave college and get a job. And that somehow felt surprising. And I'm a ski bum at heart, and I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna ride off into the sunset and ski my little brains out. And then I realized, no, you actually need to make money and contribute to Earth. And at that time, I had been working with my career services office, who encouraged me, because I had been a tour guide in the admissions office at my alma mater, to talk to these consultants who were coming in who kind of wanted a generalist. And I took the meeting, and I'm so glad I did, because that set me off working for a consulting group doing enrollment consulting and services right out of college. And I got pulled into rooms with university presidents and provosts and vice presidents of enrollment at 22 years old, being asked what I thought about things, which was a really powerful way to feel really important early in my career. So I got pulled along like the little sister of these serious enrollment consultants fixing serious enrollment problems. And after that, I moved on to the software product side of things. I was the first employee at a company called Fire Engine Red, where we really helped to invent like email marketing for colleges and universities, and did a lot of sort of like software products aside from the CRM on the enrollment side of things. We also did a lot of student search, and the student search, and by that I mean like purchasing names and marketing to them, doing the enrollment marketing via purchase names of test takers and other people like that. And in that era, that motion like worked pretty well. And it started to work less and less well over time. And I really enjoy being part of the small but growing thing that companies do, right? I was the first employee of that company, so I got to do all the jobs. And as I moved through my career working, at another company doing CRM for admissions and student success, again, I joined as a smaller company, was part of growing that company to be bigger and bigger. And I seem to keep going back to the small, scrappy and being there for the really exciting growth. And I really love that, because as slow as we observe colleges moving, companies can move really freaking fast. And it's really, really fun to like test stuff, fail, and iterate in that cycle. And to me, there's this through line of like really figuring out how to get a pulse on what serve students really well. And that's changed a lot over time. And being a part of feeling like a fundamental fixer of those problems is just really important to like my personal mission.
Yeah, that is so cool, and I appreciate you contextualizing and sharing all those different pieces and those through lines. Like, how do you sort of sit at the intersection of like those two very different things, right? You're serving this like very traditional industry that tends to sort of move slow, right? Where iteration is not necessarily sort of baked into the culture, where they're thinking in timelines that are sort of decades long. But you juxtaposition that with the type of work that you're doing, where it's like it's quick, it's iterative, and it's serving and all these spaces. Like, how do you hold those two extremes and find that happy middle ground between the two?
Colleges are not startups. If you've ever worked for, like on the corporate side of things, we think about, big companies that do things like really, I guess a rude reading of working for a really big company is like, it might not be apparent if you didn't show up for work for like a week, 2 weeks in a row, like your impact would not necessarily be felt. And colleges are a little bit like that, in that they are really established businesses that we expect to be open and available for jobs, for the products that they provide a community. And in startup software, we have to be so scrappy, and everybody's contribution, like every individual employee in a startup company, their impact really, really matters. So to bring some of that mindset into higher education, which is like bigger, a little slower, and a little more staid, feels really exciting on the institutional side. I think it lands really well. I also think there's some sort of leverage and power that you just get as the outsider, right? Like you might be saying something as a consultant that your cabinet had been sharing with you, that you're just hearing it differently from a consultant. And I understand that there's power in that. Um, and the third thing that I would mention is really around like the advantages that I have sitting in my seat, peering through the windows like this at like hundreds of institutions. Folks I work with on the institutional side, they know their politics really well. They know the ins and outs of like how things are politicked or clicked through in their own campuses. But I get this advantage of like bringing in this broader outside perspective, having worked with hundreds and hundreds of colleges over time. So my observations, while they're maybe a little bit broader than you would give from the inside, get to be transformational just because I get to be the outsider.
Yeah, super cool. I love that answer. Like, could you walk me through a little bit about like Collegevine specifically? You all have leaned into, which I think is just so awesome. Focused on the sort of AI space and the AI integrations and supporting, particularly sort of enrollment. You know, how have you sort of like what's Collegevine's journey been like, and then what's been your unique contribution? Because you're sort of bringing, I think, a longer narrative and historic lens about like deeply understanding CRMs and seeing that sort of original migration to email and all these sort of like bigger tech changes to serve a traditional industry. What's it been like to sort of be on that front line of AI, and what's been your own sort of like product journey at Collegevine to land in where you are now?
Yeah, so I've been at Collegevine the last 3 years. The company, I'm not a founder. The company is many years older than that and has been through a couple of different iterations. And the way I would describe what Collegevine contributes to the space now is that we're a platform for building and deploying AI agents at institutions. And that is a sort of fifth order thing that we've gotten to over time because there are a bunch of other things that we do in service of helping students and families get the best guidance possible at every stage of life, whether that's the transition from high school to college or being successful as a college student or transitioning from college to a job. And there is a limit to what humans can do, whether it's at the sort of guidance layer at all of those stages or at the administration layer of all of those different phases for a student. And now, really, as an AI company, we have created kind of autonomous AI agents that go out into the world and do work with constituents. And that's like things that you would, if you were a college president or provost listening to this and you're thinking, the ways in which you limit the requirements that you put on your staff or strategies that you create to the humans that can deliver them. We don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to put those limits on anymore. We can really dream much bigger than we have been able to in the past to think about what AI can do as a really strong point of leverage for automating different jobs at the administration layer of our institutions. And that's the problem that Collegevine is really solving right now in the college space, while bringing along students and families in a way that feels like it delivers really great access to guidance and connections across that whole landscape.
That's cool. Can you walk me through like a few of your favorite like recent use cases around like how you're solving those sort of massive operational pain points, right? Because it strikes me as you have such a unique like product and engineering challenge, just given like the sort of the data layers that you have, the challenges with sort of integration that you have with all the sort of different third party pieces, which I think you've had really sort of smart APIs and connections to solve for those. But can you walk me through like a few use cases and then what the felt experiences on the side of the user or the admin that's really doing it?
Yeah, for sure. So we've got several sort of out of the box AI agents, and probably the easiest one to like conceive of how it does its job is the AI recruiter. This is something that we are live with at several hundred colleges, and the AI recruiter essentially is an autonomous agent that delivers recruitment activities for the admissions office, whether that's pairing one-to-one with students to, like you would want a counseling staff. If you could afford it, you would hire lots of admissions counselors to pair one-on-one with students to give them an individual journey and treat like you, Mike, as an individual student versus like, Mike is a guy from Wisconsin who's like interested in engineering. So we're going to bucket him with all the other guys from out of state who are interested in engineering. It's an inherently a different experience when you're working one-to-one with a really smart advisor. So that's one job that the AI recruiter does. Another job that the AI recruiter does is to create and automate the marketing journey for the whole enrollment operation so that we don't have to do the exercise that I certainly have been part of for many years, which is like a bunch of smart people standing around with Post-it notes, mapping out the com flow of the institution, whether it's on the enrollment side or for other constituents across the journey of interacting with college. Like we have spent a lot of time mapping out, okay, on day 11, this happens. On day 13, we send this email, and then we have to go write all those things and create like great creative for it. Turns out AI is really good at that job. And in fact, better than we are, which I have some feelings about having spent logged all those hours doing that job, but AI is better than I am at it. And the third job that the recruiter does right now is processes transcripts and applications. So that's, again, something that humans have done for a long time to grid highest math, or, well, we take this GPA and we calculate it in this way. And that's a really expensive operational problem for colleges to solve that the AI recruiter does. So that's how to conceive of one of the AI agents. But the AI agents show up across this whole student success journey, being an advisor to students, a concierge to either find stuff out, like, hey, Mike, your housing form is done. Like, why haven't you done it? Or, hey, Mike, how are you feeling? Like, have you made any friends? Right. To really get at early indicators of how students are doing in their current student journey. And the applications continue to extend through the ways in which we would interact with alumni or build networks for career services. But at the administration layer, we're thinking about all of the different work that we can automate in order to do it better, faster, and bigger.
Yeah, I absolutely love that answer. I think that gives such a just concrete idea on how it's sort of working and the sort of the felt sense of what it's like to sort of be an admin working with this tool, or a student that's really sort of on the receiving end and doing the different pieces. It's so fascinating what you mentioned around that roadmap. And one institutional challenge I see like again and again is like with turnover in the space, like being relatively high and documentation on process and things like that. Not necessarily, depending on institutions, sort of being baked hard into the culture. That you have a variance around like what what that's going to look like from year to year, depending on who's sort of connected and different pieces there. That's good. It's going to sort of like change and iterate, not necessarily in good ways. And you also have this sort of lack of data capture and process capture and all these sort of connected pieces there. What are the feedback loops for that on your end to sort of ensure like, communications are sort of working well? Like, what are the things that you're looking at institution basis and how are you empowering partners to sort of like do some of the assessment pieces connected to all that?
Is the question like, is part of that question, Mike, like, how do we know it's working? Like, how do we measure it's working? Is that sort of
Exactly.
at the heart of it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Such a good question, right? Because like in this industry, turns out, fun fact, we're not like shaking the money tree and it's not like raining down dollar bills for us to like try stuff that doesn't work, right? Like we're at a critical point on making the business of the institutions work really well. So things that work are really important. And the ways that we look at sort of measuring success is like, imagine your highest order expectation for your best possible staff member. And if, Mike, I hired you at my college to work in admissions for me, I would want you every week, every day, if I wanted you to be like handing me a report card of how you were doing. I would want to know how many students you were talking to. I would want to know how many times you messed up. I would want to know how many types of different questions you were getting. I would want to take that data and be able to synthesize it to the faculty and creators of programs at our institution to be like, yo, we're getting asked a lot for this type of program that we don't offer. What are we going to do about it? Like, is that something we're going to change the business to accommodate? Or look, we can very easily see that this is no longer a program that is offering creating any real genuine interest or excitement with our population. Do we need to change the program? Is it profitable for us to keep the program? So anything that you can think of, sort of your highest order expectation of what a human staff member would deliver you to provide you real leverage in leading the institution, are the types of things that the AI agents sort of bring you and help you measure. Because it's really like that leverage that's going to allow you to be making great strategic decisions for the institution.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. What are some other use cases that you're excited about? I mean, the AI recruiter is something that, like, I've just talking with a lot of people. People are excited about. The feedback has been really good. It seems like it's sort of relatively plug and play. And despite the sort of complexity of all the interconnections that you need to make something like that work, it seems like it's working really effectively. What are some other use cases that you're pumped about?
Yeah. So the stuff that we're creating now, like imagine if you, so I'm going to ask you to like go back in your time machine to the time that you were leading career services offices, Mike. And like imagine if you were sitting with a kid, like human you were sitting with a student, and the student was, about to embark on their career search. And this is the point of college, right? To create people who can go be good citizens of Earth and contribute to our societies and cultures. Like that's the point. And you, as the career services officer, are trying to make that happen in the best possible way, like you can. And imagine if I gave you a tool that like allowed you to connect this student. Let's say the student was, let's go with engineering. Let's say the student was an engineer and was really feeling nervous about like what life looks like as an engineer. And what if AI could help you not only identify, like, sure, tabular data could do this today, but identify who from your alumni network worked as an engineer and was open to mentoring. Like you could get that with spreadsheets and joins and a good enough database today, sure. But what if AI was then able to go facilitate that introduction? Because the friction is in the introduction making in that use case, like really specifically, the friction is you write down the name of a person and say to the student, like, hey, look this person up. Go build a relationship with this person. That is freaking terrifying for a student. But imagine if you had an AI agent to not only identify the best fit alum who could go do this job for you, also indicate their willingness to be a mentor, and also then kick off this relationship and facilitate this relationship between two humans. Like that is a really high leverage move you can make as a career services person. And there are a billion use cases like that keep the human fundamental relationships or transformational relationship building at play, which is super important to colleges, but adds a techification on top of it to make it go like way faster or better. Or if you were a professor and you had an incoming suite of students in your senior seminar and you had your AI agent or your AI assistant telling you, oh, we've got these 20 students, you really need to watch out for so-and-so. She's really struggling with some other classes, so be aware of this. This other student is going to be a great leader for you. This other student has something going on in their home life that you should be aware of. This other student is heading towards a PhD in your program. That would be a really helpful, high leverage thing that you could get very quickly as a professor that would fundamentally make the way you did your job better, facilitated by better data and tech, right? Like, sure, you could wade through the data that we have today to make sense of that. You're never going to realistically do that because it's way too high friction.
Totally. Yeah. No, and I love the career services example. I deployed People Growth on a couple of campuses, and it was so fascinating, like to just like look at the data sets around all these little problems that you solve, like
That's right.
whether it's like sort of like that initial connection, the actual sort of onboarding, the target email that goes to somebody, like, but you have, even if like you execute really, really well, these tiny, tiny steps, you lose people along the way. So any way that you can sort of integrate that, like very sort of seamlessly, like your chances of like the person actually sort of doing the thing, which is like making that initial contact. What we figured out right like very quick was like, if we got the person to send one message, their chances of actually coming back were like exponentially higher, and sort of using the tool regularly were really high. But like there's so many steps between like the person like getting on the platform and then
That's
actually
right.
finding that first person that you want, like that you connect with, that like if you can close that gap, like that is a massive lever in terms of like the person's career trajectory that you don't really sort of think of, but it's like a bunch of mini steps consolidated. If you can solve those pain points, it's huge. So it's really cool to see that you're doing this in like a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we talk about, like on the sort of corporate side of things, I'll bring a term in from SaaS software that might be interesting to your audience, which is like time to first value. And essentially, the quicker you can bring your consumer time to first value, and that's as short as possible, the better, like the better life of the customer, whether it's, revenue
Yeah.
or success or whatever we're measuring over time. And in your instance of like, if we could just get them to send that first email, or on the recruitment side, if we can have that first interaction be really positive, you're right. It creates less friction in the rest of that chapter of the journey. But that time to first value thing is a really interesting thing to measure across your constituents, to watch that friction start to dissipate.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've not heard it phrased exactly like that, but I love that time to first value as a metric. Like, I'm just curious, like, how do you measure? Is there like simple ways to measure that? I'm
Yeah,
sure it's
for
like
sure.
depends on the use case, but
Yeah, it super depends on the use case. And this is something that we like talk about both on the product side of tech companies as well as the client success side of tech companies. And it's basically like whatever you think the first valuable moment is. And usually it's whatever feels like that aha moment. So on the admission side of things, we might be really sort of hard and fast on like, well, it's the application, right? That's the thing that like allows us to really gauge interest. Things in admissions and recruitment and enrollment are actually way easier for us to measure than other use cases across the administration layer of an institution. But it could be something like sentiment. It could be
mm,
something like, Gartner does a really interesting survey on a set of questions that like allows you to measure the success of your employees. And one of the questions is like, have you made a best friend at work? And you ask adults if they've made a best friend, and they're like, no, I'm a 45-year-old man. Like, I don't need to make a best friend. But really, like those types of things, like a student, have you made a best friend yet? Like, have you joined a club yet? Are really strong indicators of how a student is viewing their experience at your institution. So you kind of get to call it. But when you call it, then just like anything else we measure, like the point would be then to measure consistency, learn, iterate, do it again.
love that, love that. Sort of a question that I could just think of the sort of audience asking, because I know this sort of differs wildly, sort of depending on the use cases and different pieces. But how do you build your AI agents, right? Like, because I think the basics that you hear pretty consistently from AI engineers are essentially you're feeding it a lot of data, and you're doing sort of systematic training to sort of get it to sort of perform the ways you want, giving feedback and all those kind of pieces. But what's that look like for you? Because you have such a variety of use cases. You're, I think, increasingly sort of getting into this more sort of customized space, and having solutions that are sort of both out of the box, but also sort of tweakable, or like. So what's like the back end of Magic look like for really sort of making these things work in the way that you want them to work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the other element that I'll add to it is colleges do a lot of feeling around in the space of like, we know we need a thing. Do we build
Yeah,
it or do we buy it?
right.
And there's sort of that element too, which is like, can we do it ourselves? And I think what's really interesting with AI is that, um, very occasionally I'll talk to somebody about, the AI recruiter, for example, and they'll just be like, well, why couldn't we just chat GPT it? Uh, The AI that you go out and ask something of is reacting to a request in a transactional way. In 2025, we are heading into a place of agentic AI that is more autonomous and proactive, where you give it a whole job. Yo, AI, recruit the class. Hey, AI, take all of the caseload of all of our 40,000 students and make them successful.
I'm so curious about this with you all, because you guys are doing some really sort of interesting work, uh, like at the intersection of building really cool bots that are doing amazing things. What are some unexpected challenges that you've faced, like in terms of sort of deploying and opening up your range of products and things that you're doing, and then how have you worked to overcome those?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, I think most of the discourse about AI in higher education right now is on the teaching and learning side. And I think that's a debate we need to solve and solve quickly. So that's sort of thing one. And by that, I mean, like, we can't spend time screwing around with like institutionally how we feel about the use of AI in the classrooms. Because if you start to indicate like a less than clear stance on this, you will start to create ripples for your students. You will start to then have those ripples become waves, which will make students not feel really confident in their participation of your brand as an institution. And I guess I care more about making a stand on this than what the stand is. Though, of course, I think the stand is look, if we're trying to create, especially young people who are going to participate in the world in meaningful ways and get jobs, then one of the things that we need to do is to train them how to use AI well. It's a job skill. So, of course, I have a very strong opinion about how institutions come down on this, but I actually care more that institutions have a really strong stance on it. I think once we can let some of that air out of the room on like the focus that we spend on AI for teaching and learning, we need to quickly turn our attention to like what AI can solve at the administration layer. Because I think about, institutionally, like if you correct for hospital revenue and if you correct for some of the sort of enrollment demographic student search cliffs, it's about a $93 billion deficit on the administration layer that schools are facing and fighting. And that's a broad statement, it's a big number. But I think if schools can turn their attention to like what AI can help at the administration layer, then and what jobs we would want to have AI automate, then I think it really frees us up to think about what challenges and strategies that we might want to solve. And one of the surprises that I have is the difference between leadership at an institution. Some of them are thinking like, okay, yes, actually our human costs, our cost of the human staff are actually way too great. We need to pare that down and have AI take over the work. And then the other camp, which is no, protect humans and jobs at all costs. And I sort of say to them like, okay, great, but let's think about the ways in which using AI better at the administration layer can give your existing staff a promotion. And by that, I mean, like if you use AI well, you are essentially giving yourself a promotion. So if you used to be the person who compiled data, AI should do that for you. And you can be now the person that analyzes the data, right? There's like a leveling up that we can offer to our staffs. So one of the surprises I have is sort of like how much time we're spending on this teaching and learning debate, which I think needs to end. And the second is around like this divided road on should we automate people out of jobs or should we automate enough jobs so that people can be leveled up in their jobs? And those feel like really fundamental debates that feel important to resolve in the next chapter.
Yeah, I think they're definitely sort of huge debates, and I completely understand the thinking through the second order, third order effects of like, hey, if we're downsizing our staffs in this way, or this way, we're potentially looking at a very sort of different workforce, and I totally get that angle of it. At the same time, I mean, especially at like at private institutions, or I think you could almost say it's sort of non-community colleges, like the costs to the end student is paying are so high, right?
Yes.
And I think we are in an environment where good, bad, or indifferent, the signaling from the federal government at this point is, there's not more federal dollars that are going to, like an influx that are sort of going to be coming. Um, I think we've also seen the folly of a lot of institutions really relying on their donor base, when we know those dollars from a outside of like a small percentage are going down, given rates are sort of going down. So I think I would argue the writing is on the wall in a lot of ways that like, hey, we don't have this influx of cash that are coming to undercut the cost of like really sort of growing administrations. How do we do this work more effectively? And I think you all solve like a really sort of interesting thing there. For you, like what are like some of the, like when you're looking like 2, 3 steps ahead, what are like some of the really cool things that you think your tech could sort of jump in and solve that like potentially, I don't want to say like eliminate jobs, but just heighten the experience of like how a person sort of sitting in this sort of like admin functional role could maybe sort of do the work differently.
Well, I think about that mindset, right? That like more money is not coming. And I think that breeds innovation. And we can choose to be flattened by that and feel really scared about what that might mean, or we can choose to let that make us curious and hungry to really like flex and do different things. And one of the things that I see happening in the world of work that I don't know is happening in colleges yet is a culture of like efficiency and figuring it out, right? Like in our jobs, and I think about the ways that we, like create our work culture at Collegevine, which we've done really, really intentionally, just in terms of how we do work. There's a really new sort of emerging culture that I think is trickling around like getting really hungry to just figure it out and do the most efficient thing possible. I mean, I could sort of like claim being really long in the tooth and saying like early in my career, I can imagine a time saying like, I don't know how to do something, or I didn't do something because I couldn't figure it out, or I didn't have the tools to do that. That's not a like an objection anymore in doing work. And I would encourage colleges to kind of approach AI with the same type of lens, which is like
Hmm.
there's no reason to not do things more efficiently, and to look at points of leverage, whether it's like automating the front door in the admissions office or keeping students successful. If I even think about like diving down into that question, Mike, around like what can be different in the way we recruit students or the way we retain students, I think the admissions use case is really well known. Like school to school, schools will tell me all the time, like, well, we're really unique. We recruit students in really different ways. And I'm like, ha ha ha, no, you don't. And like I can see like you're smiling at me right now, which tells me
Yeah.
like you and I have heard of the same thing. Like
Oh my
schools will
gosh.
claim like we're really different. And I'm like, no, nope, no, you're not. Uh, that's just not true on the admissions and recruitment side. On the student success side, though, schools are really different. And this is where the difference of like value prop school to school is actually really remarkable, both in terms of like who owns that number and who owns that metric, how you report against it, and then what programs and services you deliver to your students in order to support that number and those goals. So I actually think like some really interesting innovation is going to be happening in the student success space, because all of the jobs to be done in admissions are being handled right now, right? Like
Mhm.
you reach out to students, they have an application, they have something to do, you have something to do. That process is really known. Student success in general and student service in general has been so very limited to the humans that have been delivering those programs and services. Like we can't even imagine, because even if you think about advisors, they are tasked with a caseload of 500 kids. Like how well can you get to know 500 college students who are dealing with a huge range of complex issues as humans? And we have only limited our like what can we deliver from the student services side to what the humans who are staffing this can deliver. And I think it has been really inadequate. And I think that better use of technology and AI agents is going to be the thing that not only allows us to solve the problem, but really like start imagining what those jobs are that we need to do in order to keep the students successful. So my argument there is like, I don't even think we've thought about what those things could be, because we've
Yeah,
always been limited to what the human resources that we've had could deliver for us.
completely, completely. That's such a fascinating point. We don't know what those end solutions could possibly be. When you think about, and I like my bias here is almost sort of going to like the tiny bit I know of like training like an AI model, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
like crafting like a really good prompt to start to kind of get things. When you think about, um, you know, we've got all these sort of different challenges that are sort of in the space. We've got, declining demographics, shrinking in different areas. We've got costs that are way too high. We have administrative overburden. We have like, I think a really sort of big massive institutional challenge, which I think you guys are actually helping solve with regards to sort of data lakes that don't connect to one another, right? So
Yeah.
you've got
Yep.
this sort of very sort of disparate data sets. I think you've got all these sort of interconnecting pieces that I think kind of get to the point you made earlier, which is, administrative um, efficiencies just aren't there, right? Like when you think about going to a place where it's like you don't know what the solutions are, but you've got, kind of what some of the problems are. And from your customers, you know a lot of what those challenges are. From the students, you know a lot of. How do you think about like getting to those really interesting solutions and sort of like thinking 3 to 4 steps ahead about what those could possibly like be? What are the data that you're really sort of curious at looking at? What are the sort of trends in the sort of broader space that you're just curious about? Where's your brain go with that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'm always going to start with like where we can learn from leading indicators. And I think pulling leading indicators versus lagging indicators, and this is like again something we talk about potentially in tech that I don't know that we talk about on the institution side.
Yeah.
But if we can focus our energy on leading indicators, then the behaviors that result then become a little bit clearer. Because lagging indicators are sort of like the Gartner maturity curve of analytics,
Mhm.
which is to say, like, looking in the rearview mirror tells you something. It helps you analyze the past. But actually, higher order work is when you can become predictive and then
Mhm.
prescriptive, right? To predict
Mhm.
what might happen and then be prescriptive about how you might change that. And I think driving up on that maturity curve of analytics is actually a good way to think about how you might choose different behaviors and strategies, whether that's like a solution that you might buy or how you might direct the staff.
Yeah, love that. I do think that leading versus lagging indicator is just something that is very sort of overlooked,
Yeah.
and really sort of like thinking about sort of how do you differentiate between those two very, very different things.
Yeah. Well, and I think like to your the sort of the first part of that question around like sort of how you use AI and how you train AI models. And you and I had started talking a little bit about like how institutions are thinking about AI right now, and really like all institutions, when you think about solving it, particularly a technical problem, rightly you're going to go through this exercise of like, do we build this or do we buy this?
Yeah.
And I think there's like a case on AI and sort of the way you might evaluate like an AI vendor or AI partner or something you might direct your IT group to build for you. Some of the things that you want to think about are like how you train it, how accurate it is, and how like genuinely helpful it's going to be. And sort of whether that's around like providing access in a more democratic way and more services to students, or if it's really around sort of accuracy, correctness, and sort of alignment with like institutional tone. All of that is really important. And some of the things that we've played out on our side to create products that do that, it's not just one AI model, it's 30. So when
Mm.
you interact with our AI recruiter, you're not just getting like one LLM that's like a yes man to you,
Yeah.
right? It's as if you're like consulting a whole room of smart people. If the question is like, hey, do you have a good tennis team? It's like consulting a whole room of smart people. Like, yeah, we have a tennis team, correct? Yes. Okay. Is it good? Yeah. Okay. Yes. No. Okay. Okay. Our tennis team might not be good. Let's actually deliver this answer.
Hmm.
And just like you would deal with sort of sort of a conference of smart people, multiple AI models actually prevent poor information, poor tone, in order to get that correct information and good tone out to students.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. I was giggling when you referenced the sort of differentiation piece, like for with colleges and universities, because this is something I see all the time, and you do too. I'm sure in your work, right? It's like the admissions office that is sort of trying to sort of pack, or the marketing department that's trying to sort of packaging this sort of unique things. It's like those 3 to 4 pillars and the individualized attention, like the things that they're selling are like not necessarily sort of unique in the market, and usually they have to sort of like dive deeper to really to like sort of surface that, right? When it comes to like your own product, if you were
Yes.
sort of giving the pitch, like what's unique about you? Because I think I could sort of maybe regurgitate it back to you in a way that wouldn't be true. But like when you think about what's unique about Collegevine, how do you package that for somebody?
It's super easy right now, and I see this, all the way down to like when we do, a final purchasing process with a president or a provost. I've sole sourced a lot of things for a lot of public institutions over time. Um, none of them have been truly unique, right? Like I have claimed that a CRM is unique. I've claimed that a certain service is unique. Nobody else is doing what we're doing right now in the space in terms of innovating an AI agent platform to automate different jobs across campus. That's certainly true in the recruitment space, particularly. So claiming uniqueness right now is easy, but even if it weren't easy, let's say we had lots of competitors in the space doing this job. I think what makes Collegevine stand out is that we are at our heart like a network product where or like a really a network because you might not know this about Collegevine, Mike. We have millions of students on our network who are doing their college journey. They're accessing tools for free. They're getting connected to colleges that they care about in ways that feel really good to them. And we are bringing access, again, like with sort of democratizing the process in mind. We're bringing access to students who otherwise can't afford or wouldn't afford a really expensive guidance counselor to get them into a really elite college. We have plenty of those students as well. Those students are really active in the process. And we certainly have many of them on Collegevine. But for the students who don't have access to good guidance from their high schools, from no fault of their own or from their high schools, we can serve them in ways, again, we can sort of make that job much more efficient for them with the help of AI and really good tools that are free for them. So that's really an important part of like everyone here on the network, whether it's colleges doing their work, students joining to get that good guidance, and being a network really helps us to smooth every single part of it. So claiming uniqueness is a piece of it. Being a network overall is another piece of it. And then the way I think we train our models is really important. And you should have a mindset of training AI like you would train a really smart staff member, where if you got a new employee, you would like march them through the parade of HR, where you would have them watch some compliance videos about like how to lift with your legs and how not to like take bribes at work, right? Like there's the compliance HR parade. But then after you got them through that, like what would you do? You would teach them a bunch of things about how to act as an agent of your institution. You'd give them a bunch of stuff to read, and you would have them set up a bunch of conversations with smart people at your institution so that you could learn not only like what to say, but how to represent the institution. You're a representative of the institution in whatever job that you do. We really think that that's an important thing to retain as far as training our models and having schools work with our AI models, that mindset should be, really high order, like as if you were training a really smart staff member. And the results really speak for themselves on that front.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought the front end sort of piece of your product where you're helping sort of shepherd students through this very sort of convoluted process, because that's a totally different value proposition, right, than the one that you're offering to students. I have to assume that probably comes with its own challenges, right, where you've got this challenges and advantages and opportunities, right, where you've got a really sort of diverse and multifaceted product that is serving administrators in some way, and that's where the listeners are going to be more familiar. But then you've actually got the products that are actually sort of helping students through a very convoluted like admissions process. And what are some of the UX challenges of like serving those two different populations and designing tools, product, software, et cetera, that fit the very different needs of the two? And then what are like some competitive advantages you have by matching those two data sets in ways that maybe competitors don't?
Yeah, I would say that it's actually not that complicated when a core tenet of like what we do at the company is sort of genuineness and candor in service of helping people, right? Like if that's the held belief, then it's actually really easy to make product decisions about where we spend our developer time or what features that we release, right? Like even in terms of, something small, like the way that we connect students to colleges, because if you got students on our site doing their journey, the way that they get connected to colleges outside of Collegevine feels really bad. In that model, this is the student search model that we were starting to talk about earlier, their name gets bought and sold in ways that they can't control and in ways that feel really bad for them. then the follow-on effects, especially if you're a college that is trading on this brand of like, we give a shit about you and we want to get
Yeah.
to know you, but you've met them through this mechanism that feels really bad, like that's a broken system.
Mhm.
So if you take that same small example about how students get connected to colleges and you think about how to do that better, you let students control it. You let students say yes or no to being connected with a particular college. And because they control it, they are much more willing to share with us candidly about who they are, what motivates them, what their preferences are. And
Mhm.
those preferences and data points not only help us understand what their challenges are and what products we should create for them, but helps us advise our college partners about what their population of students really care about. So there is a genuineness and candor component that actually makes those product decisions really easy, because then you get to just drive behaviors out of those sort of that felt belief or that held belief. The behaviors and tactics that you deploy just feel really simple, all in service
Yeah.
of that. So I don't know that it's actually that complicated, with that at the center, because that is the thing that frees us up to really then focus on like, okay, what do we innovate on? Where can we gain efficiencies? What might we make recommendations to a college to actually do?
Yeah. I love that answer. And just the letting your, I think, values and beliefs really sort of guide some of your strategic decision making there. You've been super generous with your time. Like, what are you excited about? Like, there's so much sort of happening in the space. You all are building some pretty incredible things. Like, what gets you personally excited?
I am personally excited for like solving more stuff for students. I can remember being a college student and not knowing how to run, my college search journey. Once I got to college, being really confused when I had to go to the registrar and ask for a transcript, not understanding the systems that I was a part of. And in my day, it was like, going to talk to like old Marge in the registrar's office, and you had to go do something in triplicate, and then you had to like mail it here and put it in this
Yeah.
slot. And like it just seemed like a lot of sort of like magic that I didn't really understand how I was part of it. And I think that problem still exists today, where students actually have a higher expectation of how they're treated, like as consumers, right? To like that we should know more about them and treat them better. And I think the stakes are higher for institutions, right? Because with more and more institutions closing and being under like serious financial duress, and that's bad for communities. We have to sort of do two things. One is like become more efficient as an industry, and also like meet a higher standard.
Yeah.
And I actually think that better use of AI with data underneath it is the key lever to how that's going to happen. And I can see this in like, if I put my sort of like student search hat on as an enrollment marketer, and I'm pretty happy with a school that, buys a list of names, and then you market to that list, you get like a 19% open rate. And I think that's pretty good. When I think about what AI is doing right now, it's closer to a 40% open rate,
Yeah.
right? Like, so I track that over time, and then I watch the efficiencies that start to fall out of that, which is like, oh, we could run a smaller funnel. We could
Yeah.
actually do this more efficiently, find better fit students, and create classes
Oh,
about
yeah.
the things that we want. Like another layer of what AI can do on sort of the class building side of things is help you index on like, we are a college that creates leaders, and we need a really civic minded class. That's a job that you can have AI go do across so much data that we like cannot hold in our human brains.
Oh, yeah.
So I think overall, like the solving of that higher standard that students have and making it more efficient at the same time, and sort of that like big orchestration of all of the things that need to happen to make those two things true, are what I'm just like super excited to be a part of. Because in my journey, I got to see from Marge in the registrar's office and the friggin' triplicate pieces of paper to like what we can do today. And it's just thrilling to watch that continue.
Couldn't agree more. I think that's a fabulous place to end it. But yeah, thank you for the time here, Emily. And yeah, please let people know how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, so you can find me on collegevine.com, on LinkedIn at Emily Smith, And you can also check out, I also have a podcast, which is really similar to this one. So if you like the topics that Mike talks about, I too have a podcast. It's called The Weekly Vine Down. You can find us at thevinedown.com. And I hang out there putting out a new show about every week.
Awesome. Well, this has been awesome. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Mike.